Mhm. All right, everybody. Y'all can see me. I'm not finished eating, so I'm like a little bit discombobulated here. All right, so should we just jump in, or y'all got questions, or
Let's jump in.
good? Okay, so let's talk about just some general advice about constructing survey questions. Many people make the mistake of double barreling the question. So I wanted to bring it up really quickly, which is like, do you want to eat Mexican or Italian, or would you rather stay home and eat? Like, and then it's like Mexican or Italian or stay home. People don't know, are they responding to having Mexican food? Which of course the answer is yes, especially if you're in New Mexico. And, Italian food, you might be like, well, Italian, and people aren't sure what they're responding to. So you have to really be careful. I have a grad student in journalism who's constructing an A/B experiment right now, which is a large and internet experiment. And she had some questions in there, like, would you be willing to pay for a subscription to read this article or donate? And the question is slightly different, and so we've had to decide, do you want to experimentally manipulate that question? Or, how do you want to handle it? Because you can't ask for, pay for, and donate, because some people would donate but not pay for, and other people, so in any case, you have to be careful with that. Simple interviewer instructions should be clear and detailed. So I have some examples here with interviewer instructions. So we ask the question, some people think all are equal before the court, whether they're rich or poor, ordinary people or bosses. Other people think the court treats rich and powerful better than it treats ordinary people. Which view is closer to your own? So we ask them that. They say, the court treats everybody the same. They treat everybody different. Right now it's dichotomous. And then we say, do you feel this way strongly or only somewhat? And then that fills out a 4-point Likert scale. And that's meant to reduce the dependence on don't know. It forces, if you give a don't know answer, people will be more likely to pick it when they actually even have an opinion. So that's one of them. And so we have interview instructions. And then for this question, we wanted to find out, these are people who were either in the school when Beslan was taken over by hostage takers, or they lost a family member to death. So everybody in this who's being asked this question has had loss, And so we asked them, how many of your family members were hostages? Because some people are both. They were in the gymnasium, but they also lost a kid, or, something like that. So we asked them a ton of questions about their immediate family and what happened to them. Did that person die? Or, it was kind of the equivalent of K-12 graduation. grandmas, parents, teachers, everybody's there, everybody's dressed up. So it was not just the kids who were in school that day and the teachers. There were a lot of parents. And I don't know if y'all know much about it, because I guess you were kids when it happened, but hostage takers, some of whom I'm unwilling to call terrorists because they didn't know what they were doing. They were taken along for the ride, picked up. Suddenly they were in some place. They tried to get out. A lot of them were shot and killed by the actual terrorists. And so it's kind of a mess. But if you can see here, we have lengthy interviewer respondents right in the table, all the family members who were held hostage, beginning with themselves and follow in this order. And then as a result of the hostage taking, we ask about the first relative first. We ask a bunch of questions, and then we ask about the next relatives. And so it's actually quite a detailed thing, and trying to put that together is kind of a mess when you're trying to understand how severe was their experience. You know, did they lose their entire family? Or, you know, did they lose a limb? Or, you know, like it's, you know, are they troubled by PTSD ever since? Like all those kinds of questions we ask. So it's kind of hard to put apples and oranges together in terms of a scale, but nevertheless, you know, so we gave this to the interviewer to say, okay, if they were a hostage, don't ask them about these questions, and then ask them then go to the next question. And so we, have stuff like that. All right. So Guttman scales is something we're going to talk about today. People don't use those as much as they maybe could or should. Did y'all learn about Guttman scales when you were in Data 1? Have you heard of one? So, okay, so I'll make the comment first and then I'll explain what it is. So I say all the time that the job market, the political science job market, is not a Guttman scale. And when I say that, what I mean is that, yes, potentially the quality of your methods training, dissertation, how much people are captivated by being interested in your dissertation is correlated somewhat with the chances of getting a job, but it is freaking random. You know, it's just, there's so much random variation that you almost can't take the bad news personally as much as you can't take the good news personally. Like you can't be like, well, I did great on the job market and feel all great about yourself, because chances are it was a fucking accident that you got the job, and it was an accident that you didn't. So in any case, not entirely, but I'm just saying, you know, when I interviewed for this job 6 weeks after I took comps. So I was as green as you could possibly be. I was so green, I was gold, if you know that Robert Frost poem. Like I should not have been in a job tucking and went miserably bad, you know? So it's like, it was lucky in some ways, you know, that the guy they really offered it to was kind of a dick to everybody in the interview. You know? Otherwise I would have never beat him. So it's just, it's chance, you know, not entirely, but you know, okay. So Guttman scales are based on dichotomous items, and you use them when you have strong priors about where those items place you on the scale. Okay. So for instance, well, maybe I should talk about the other kind of scales, because we're going to have some fun with IRT. I've just been wigging out on IRT scales preparing for this lecture. It's so much fun. IRT scales are, it's an analysis that I use on my test items. And when I give exams in my class, I collect data. You know, the Canvas gives you all the data, and you put it right into an IRT, and you can see which questions actually suck, you know, and you can get information about how valid your exam was as a measure of student preparedness or whatever, you know. Okay, and mean indices are commonly what we use. I mean, we just generally put everything on the same scale and create a mean index. Does everyone know what a mean index is? So it says, okay, if we have 5 items and Matt answered all 5 items, and Matt, you were having kind of a bad weather day. So a couple of the answers you were like, okay, I'm a 2 on those 2, but I'm a 4 on the other 3. Then we give you personally the mean of those items, which would be around, 3, I guess, something like that, and then the next person will get, the next thing. And those are usually the things we're interested in doing reliability analyses on. And then there's factor analysis. And my guess is you have not learned about factor analysis. Is that correct? Great. Yay, I'm adding value. So Gutman scales, a great example of a Gutman scale is when you can't measure socioeconomic status because income is meaningless, then you just ask people what they own. Do you own a radio? Do you own a TV? Do you own a computer? What else would you own? Skis? Like if we were measuring it among grad students, because I know y'all vary socioeconomically. Some of you have rich parents, others don't. Some of you have, spouses or partners who are footing the bill a little bit. So you don't have, your life doesn't have to suck quite as bad as it, is for other people, right? And so you're going to own more stuff. So if we were, if we looked at your income, well, your incomes are all the same. So that's not helpful. Well, some people have a ton of camping equipment, a fancy car, and other people are just scraping by with, you have barely enough to eat, right? And I'm assuming that's true. Okay. So if you personally, or some grad student in the program, owns a second home in Aspen, where I'm making shit up, because probably none of the professors own a second home in Aspen, but okay. Pretty much, we don't have to ask any more questions. Isn't that right? Who gives a shit if you own a radio? You don't have to own a computer. You don't have to own anything. We already know you're at the top. We're just done asking that question. So we don't take a mean of whether you own, because who owns a radio? Nobody owns a radio anymore. And, so it might not be relevant. Or, I'll ask if you have a TV, some people are like, they want to be fancy people. And they're like, well, I don't watch TV, and it has nothing to do with their wealth. Right. And so if you have enough information, then, you can start accounting for things. So, do you feel like you have, you could ask a question, do you feel like you have enough to comfortably eat every week or whatever? And some people who are really at the bottom of the barrel might have to say no to that, right? That's why I bring snacks, because I was scraping by myself in grad school. So, it's like that. So that person, you don't need to know did their great aunt give them skis when they moved to Colorado. If they don't have enough to eat, they're at the bottom of the barrel, and you already know where they are. So because of your strong theoretical construct, you decide to put them at the bottom. And then you decide to ask the next question. Well, do you own a car? No, yes. That puts you next to Aspen or something. And then do you own a, and so then you go down, and so you use strong priors using these items to place people on the scale, and the unidimensional scale. And there's a way of testing for reliability, on that scale. Like, is it the case that the higher quality or whatever, then you get more likelihood of owning the next thing or something like that. So it tends to be the case that if you don't own the things that are in the middle of the scale, if you're predicted to not own those things, do you actually not own those things? So then you can kind of get a sense of whether that works together. Can you think of anything else that could go on a Gutman scale? Like sometimes, like, I don't, I'm just, I have a expected answer, but I don't want to give it to you yet. Imagine, you're on a date, okay? And your date says something really thoughtful and smart, like cracks some joke that you kind of give an estimation of, oh wow, that really gives me an indication that they're pretty smart. I don't know if that resonates with you, that like one person can make one comment and you're like, yep, that person's pretty smart, right? Like you're like, yep, that was pretty thoughtful or kind. Like they do a really kind thing right in front of you. And you're like, I don't need more information. I'm looking at that act and it was costly. And that act, gives me a sense of their character, right? Don't we do that? We do that all the time. And then we don't look, oh, did they leave a mess around the house the next day? Like you're like, no, I already know they're kind. Something else accounted for the leaving around the mess, right? It's like you use one piece of information. So can you think of anything else? Anybody?
Would that be
Joey, I
like-
guess you have to chat. So I better open it up if your microphone's not working.
Would that be like also like the reason why we do more so of a one question education? Like we wouldn't ask someone if they went to elementary school, if they have like a undergraduate degree or something like that, like along the lines of that, or
Yeah, I mean, because you really can't assume that they went to elementary school, right? And if they didn't, it wouldn't matter. Like once they have a college degree or a PhD, who gives a shit if they graduated from high school or whatever, right? Like that, that has to happen. And, that's why we say, please give us your highest level of education. So that would be, one. But we don't have to ask that in a dichotomous yes, no situation. It's already on its own scale. What about political participation and costly versus uncostly political participation? Like virtue signaling on Facebook is not always, but generally low cost, right? So people posting a political thing on Facebook is not very costly. On the other hand, not everybody does it. Probably more people vote than do that. And so it's, so you have to ask yourself the question, is it more than voting? So would you put somebody on a higher level of the Gutman scale where you would say, I don't care if they voted, as long as they posted something on Facebook, then that's the thing that matters. Or you could go in with a strong prior and say, I don't care if it's more rare, voting is harder than posting something on Facebook. And so you, as a theoretical construct, you just put it higher on the scale, despite it being more common. Do you see what I mean? So like, if I know we're all pretty politically active people, but who on the call has ever done a hunger strike? No, I have not done a hunger strike. And so it's like, if somebody's done a hunger strike, you're done with the conversation. Like they're interested, they're participating, they care about political outcomes, something like that, right? That they are, you're going to code them as activists, regardless of did they put up a sign in their yard, Alberto.
Well, that was exactly my example, like donating money to a campaign or a candidate and whatnot, correct?
Yeah. Like it, so like you could ask a bunch of dichotomous questions and then figure out where each question goes on the scale. And then as soon as somebody reaches that level and has a positive, that's where you put them, and then you don't ask them the rest. And you could go from top to bottom, or you can go from bottom to top, or you can go both directions and meet in the middle. There's ways of going about it where you could do something like that. And just knowing that a hunger strike is costly. Political violence is political participation. Now, maybe, it's a different construct or something, we would say, well, that's illegitimate, and so we would, put the thing on there. But like, I think that I have to know the political participation literature, because some of the things that cause political participation are likely also going to cause people to support or engage in political violence. Joey. Political affiliation. So tell me why it would be a Gutman. Oh, you're on the line, because like we ask people, are you Democrat or Republican or an independent? And then we ask people after we, are you a strong Democrat or a strong or a weak Democrat, and if you're independent, do you lean one direction, right? And so would it be a dichotomous item? Like, we've placed them in the categories. They don't say yes or no to each. Are you a strong Republican? No. Are you a weak Republican? No. Are you an independent leaning Republican? Like, we don't ask each dichotomous one. We just have a scale, and then we place them places on the scale. So the difference between a Gutman scale and these other scales is we'll say, what's your highest level of education? And then we put them there. We don't have to ask the question of, did they say yes, no to this one? Yes, no to this one. Yes, no to this one. Yes, no to this one. Like, I'll give you another example. In the GSS, they have, you can't imagine how many questions that, I find it shocking, kind of thing, all kinds of risky behaviors, all kinds of illegal behaviors, And so is it more risky to sleep with 100 prostitutes last year? Or is it more risky to use heroin? So we ask all these yes, no questions, and we get a sense of all these risks, of where they sit on all these risky, behaviors. And we want to get a latent trait of tendency to do risky things. And we'd have to figure out which thing is more risky, right? In that way. Maybe somebody is just, asexual, so they don't, that part's not relevant for them or something like that. So it wouldn't be a risky behavior. Or they've been married for 40 years. They drive drunk every day, but they're not out having sex with prostitutes. So it's stuff like that, and people are like, well, how many partners have you had in the last year? And people are up to 1,000, it's like, damn, that's a big number. Yeah, your question about assuming conservative or liberal based on questions like religiosity, I don't think political scientists do that. I mean, at least not good ones, at least not good ones. Good ones would know the difference between, those are two different scales. And Anand is trying to understand Christian nationalist religiosity, which is a separate construct from I pray every day, Going to church in particular is probably, in a way, I mean, it's correlated with praying and thinking religion is important and stuff like that. But a lot of people go to church and aren't religious at all. Look at all the Jews in the world, me included. Like, we're a bunch of atheists, but they celebrate Shabbat every Friday, and it's just like, I just like the songs and holla, it's that kind of thing. So it's kind of a separate construct. So people would say it's different, It's more you want to understand the truth of a person's level of need, or comfort, like it goes, high need to now I'm a little uncomfortable to now I'm a little more comfortable to I don't even think about money because I just always got it, kind of thing. And probably up to some level, wealth doesn't make a difference anymore. Like, it's another interval level. Certainly income is another seemingly interval level that is not interval level, because like, I don't know what y'all earn. Y'all earn like 30 grand. 20 grand. Yeah, something like 20 or 18 or something. That is super big time poverty, right? Especially in Boulder, where you've got, you got to live in a home, you got to have a roof over your head while you're in grad school. And, a person, I made 8 grand in grad school, and I was, I was eating, and, of course it was in the 90s and it was in Houston. Housing was cheaper, food, eating out is cheaper, and so it's like, I have more comfort at 8,000 than you do at 18 or whatever your salaries are. So it's more that you've got indicators that are meant to indicate where people are on a latent trait, but a single indicator is not enough. I can't ask the question hunger strike and get any sense of where everybody is, right? And that's going to help us understand IRT in a little bit. But Guttman scales don't depend on empirics. Guttman scales depend on your theoretical predisposition. So for instance, I would say that Marcel Roman, who gave a job talk last year, I don't know if anybody on this call was there for that one. I have never in my lifetime seen a better job talk. Maybe Josh, Jenny, Professor, Jen Fitzgerald gave an amazing job talk. Like there's people out there who gave great job talks, but like that was especially good. And we offered it to everybody else but him, Now I have some, I almost wish I could just get him on the phone for just 1 minute. Like if you had framed it this way, and I'm on the committee and I don't even know what happened. So I would say like high quality and yet didn't get a tenure track job is a function of an accident, so that would be an example of it. And, I got a great job with a pretty shitty job talk. So it's like, all right. So, I don't mean to be self-deprecating. I love my book. It's like, it's in my heart. It's my first baby, but it was not polished at that point, All right. So practical considerations for your dissertation paper, whatever, for any research that you're working on is you always use multiple items when you can. Multiple items, as long as they don't suck, and we have ways of judging whether they suck, are always better than single items. Now, some people say, I only want this item because I know what it means and it's got a specific distribution and that's the distribution I'm interested in. But generally speaking, people are answering one off to one question and you've got so much more random measurement error. And when you've got a lot of bullshit in the variance of your dependent variable, you're just less able to, or independent variable, you're less able to get good estimates. You're going to make a type 1 error or one of them. So you cannot put stuff in a mean item unless you put everything on the same scale. So here's an example where you might, where somebody could make a mistake like this. I have all these variables about support for the police and beliefs about the police. And some of them go 0 to 6 and one of them goes 1 to 4. Well, if I take a mean item, then a person giving, I feel safe by the police, they gave a 4. That's in the middle of the scale of these other scales. And so it messes up your measurement. And so you have to put everything on the same scale if you're going to do this. So that's one thing. I have some better stated commands that lickety split turn things into 0-1 scales. So I could show people, but histograms are better than frequency distributions for indices. Now, why would that be the case? Once I've got an index together, why do I want to do a histogram and not a frequency distribution? I guess I deleted the item. Like, can you imagine if this is a frequency distribution? Like, you know, frequency distributions are good when you have 4 or 5 categories, but here we've got all in between 0 and 0.2, a bunch of in between 0.2 and 0.4. You've got 0.03, 0.063, 0.0, you know, and then you've got just a mess to look at. And so a histogram is much better for describing that variation. So here's a content validity example with support for the rule of law, because the liberal reason for supporting the rule of law is different from a conservative reason for supporting the rule of law. For conservatives, it can be, and this is just probabilistically, but is more likely to be a law and order, you know, just follow the rules and you'll be okay. I don't care if the police search and seize because I'm not breaking the law, right? Like there's stuff like that. And then a liberal reason for supporting the rule of law is like, wait a minute, civil liberties, don't, you know, that's repressive. Like, why are you getting into my medical, you know, records or whatever, you know? And so does that matter? If we ask people, do you think you are obligated to obey an unjust law? For these jerks in Florida, they're like, if a trans person enters the wrong bathroom, they've broken the law and that's that, right? And you know, it's not okay or whatever, you know, it's so that's a different thing. Right. And so they're responding from their own sense of justice. And then a liberal person will be responding to their own sense of justice when they ask that question. So that when they say, are you obligated to obey an unjust law? We're asking the respondent to consider their own sense of justice. And is it okay to break a law? By the way, up until recently, what percentage of the American population do you think says it is never? They're in the highest, they're in the lowest category there, or highest category. They're just never, it is never morally acceptable to break a law, even if it's unjust. What's the percentage, you suppose?
I would guess like maybe 30%.
Oh God, no, that's not even true today.
I think a lot lower.
Maybe because we're all responding to ourselves. Like in me, like no human is obligated to follow an unjust law, like under no circumstances. Like I could not be lower on that variable. And so it's like, you know, it's like Kohlberg's moral reasoning scale. To get a high score on that, you have to know the difference between justice and the law and know that you have to follow morals and, you know, and ethics. But up until the last decade, it's been somewhere between 75 and 85%, depending on the survey. Aren't you shocked at that? I'm like, what are these people smoking? Like, I have no idea, you know? And so it's you can't tell North Americans in general, but particularly US residents, anything bad about the law. They're just like, it's never okay, you know, bizarrely. All right. So like, that's the question about, is that a problem that people are responding to different meanings of justice? All right. So let's talk about reliability. Did y'all talk about reliability in Data 1? So y'all know, okay, so we'll kind of go through this pretty fast then. Test, retest, alternate form. Alternate form is the usual way that we assess reliability because we're not often analyzing panel studies, which use different techniques. Alternate form means you're using multiple measures and then you're going to test to see, do these multiple measures seem to be you know, unidimensional. And even if the probability of being in a high level of one variable might be different along the scale, depending on these items, they're intercorrelated with one another. Does anybody remember the statistic we use to assess reliability? Well, it's an alpha. So I have some fake data on the it's in the files folder in our folder. That's customer service data. And this customer service data asked a number of questions. Did the person get back to you in a timely way? Did they answer all your questions? Like, you know, and then the last item was, are you overall satisfied with the service you have received today? You know, it's like that. And we got, oh, it doesn't tell us our end, does it, in this one? Okay, so let's talk about what this table does. Y'all seen a table like this before? Should we blow through it or should we take some care? Okay, the important things here is we've got, okay, number of observations. We do have 60. You got to look here and make sure we're talking about the same signs, because if you've got a mixed up sign, it's going to mess up your reliability really, really badly. Okay. Then you look at item test correlation. Item test correlation is whether each item is correlated with the mean index of the other items. And what are you seeing here in this column? It's like Sesame Street. Which one is not like the others? You know?
Items 1 through 3 are good. They're good questions, but item 4 is a crap question. Because
Yeah.
doesn't it need to be above 0.7? Isn't that kind of
The
the
entire scale needs to be above 0.7, but the entire scale is. The entire stars, my head is in the way of the, or is it? I don't know if it is for you, but the entire scale is 79. All right. But that item is not correlating very well with the other ones. Now you're jumping to, it's a bad item. And I just want to take a step back just in case, because that is a very good indication that it is a shit item. Okay. Item test correlation is it correlated with the mean index? Item rest correlation is it correlated with the other items? And it is not. The only reason it's correlated with the test one is because it's in itself, you know, but it's just got a 0 correlation with the rest of them. Now, why would that be the case? Did they respond to you in a timely fashion? Did they answer your questions? That stuff. Why would that be different from, are you overall satisfied with the service you have received today? Maybe they got timely, but the person was rude to them. Or vice versa, right? Like those are all factual questions. And this other thing is the subjective sense that the person is satisfied, right? And if we want to understand the variation in customer service, don't we want to understand that last one? Or should it be in its own scale and we put timeliness and this other stuff in there, these yes, no versus, 4 category, very satisfied to not satisfied at all. Like maybe it's a multidimensional concept. And so then you want to be explaining them separately, or you want to use them to explain something else. Like, did the person actually buy the thing? Is it correlated with items 1 through 3 as a mean index? Or is it correlated with item 4 as a mean index, as its own variable? So there could be a reason for wanting to get it out of there. But sometimes what you can do, so I use this as an example because let me explain that last column there. This column tells you in each row what the alpha would be if you deleted that item. So if we took item 1 out and ran the alpha, it would be 0.995 exactly. It calculates it all at once, pretends that all of them are in there, and it calculates what the alpha would be, and it tells you what it would be. And so if you deleted any one of 1 through 3, suddenly you don't have a very good alpha, right? And so you've got to keep all of them in there, and alpha is very sensitive to the number of items. So I had some jackasses, nobody in this department anymore, but had taken a graduate class from me. And I asked them to, do an alpha and come up with a measurement theory for something. And they just threw every variable in the data in an alpha and you get a 0.98, because if you've got 400 variables in that alpha analysis, it will be a very strong alpha, even if you have gender, race as a nominal variable, like every, screwed up thing, which I didn't know because I never tried it before, because I would have no reason to try that before, but it's very sensitive to the number of items. So you could have a 0 correlation with every variable and still get a very high alpha if you increase the number of items. So deleting an item will reduce alpha in general, but deleting item 4 shoots that alpha back up to 0.9. Now, sometimes, and this is part of what I want to talk about, sometimes there's a measurement theory that has you double down on an item, even if it's not correlated with the other items in the analysis. So let me give you an example from my own research in the Supreme Court. So in the Supreme Court, I wanted to measure a signal from the Supreme Court that they're interested in a particular policy area. So the way I measured that signal was I looked at the number of salient cases in that policy area. I had many measures of salience. I had salience of, do constitutional scholars put this case in their legal anthologies? Was a law declared unconstitutional? Was the case a reversal of a lower court opinion? Was the case granted cert because the justices said out loud, this is an important case? Number of concurrences, number of dissenting opinions. Well, you don't have to write an opinion, and then you're given a signal that this is something you're interested in, right? Well, what if dissenting opinions is not correlated with the alteration of precedent, or whether the constitutional scholars think it's interesting? It might not be. For economic cases, it's got a much lower correlation because these economic cases are not in these case books, And so if something's not correlated, but is nevertheless a very valid indicator, Dobbs was a fucking signal. Now that deserved a F-bomb. It was a signal. That's all you need to know is Dobbs. Like, was it Dobbs or not? It was a big time signal, And so if those items are not correlated, it doesn't really matter, Oh, wow. It still increases the clarity of the signal, whether it's correlated or not. Now, they turn out to be correlated, luckily for me, or I would have had to go on another hissy fit, like my power one. Okay. Practically, you copy paste these words in your paper. When you're writing a paper and you've got a Cronbach's alpha is blah. And in no case does deleting an item increase the alpha. You're really happy if you can say that. If you decide not to say that, you have to explain why. And your reason has to be content validity. Your reason has to be your own inherent qualitative sense, just like a Gutman scale. I'm going to superimpose this variable in this scale, despite the fact that it doesn't correlate with any of these other variables, because it is part of the satisfaction of the customer. It is part of the clarity of the signal of the Supreme Court, or is part of political liberty, even though that question is not relevant for, I don't know, Asian countries or something, it wouldn't matter. So validity concerns can override. Okay, so here's an example. Supreme Court signals. Here's one that will happen on the next slide, where the world values use indications of cultural attributes that are mean level cultural attributes that citizens have said, yes, I value this. Yes, this is important to me. And they take those things and they just stack them to give a sense of, is this country traditionalist or not? Is this country secular or not? And they'll stack them regardless of whether they correlate at the individual level. They're trying to make a claim that it correlates at the macro level, which is harder to claim because you only got 90 countries or whatever, but still 90 is a lot more than any other surveys have. All right, so like think about the individual level. If you're trying to predict obesity from exercise or not, or how much exercise, sugar intake or fat intake, whether those things happen to be correlated with one another at the individual level, they all increase the likelihood, right? Age is not correlated necessarily with sugar intake, but it increases the likelihood, right? And so I don't know if y'all agree with me. But consider that for your own edification, but just understand that like I'm going to be a lot more reasonable on that topic than other people. They'll say, no, you've got to have internal consistency or throw it out, you know, and I'm just saying that it's not always that simple. So here's what they do in the world values. This is, you know, I didn't make this, downloaded it, but here's what they've done. They've got on the x-axis self-expression values versus survival. You know, I care about economy and inflation and that stuff versus no, I care about free speech more, right? And so these are, you know, estimates that come from individual level data, but they're percentages. And then you have traditional values in the low part of the y-axis, and secular rational values as the high level. Do y'all agree with those dimensions? Do those dimensions make sense, that it's like survival versus self-expression? You know, like that's Englehart's deal, right? Post-materialism. What he didn't realize is that we were always post-material. It's just that we just didn't think people were. Now you got Confucianism with secularity, but very survival, you know. You've got the Orthodox type countries, you have Islamic countries, you have Latin America, who are a little bit more on self-expression, but very traditionalist. And then you got Protestant Europe, you know, high on both. So, all right. I'm going to kind of blow through here, but here I've got support for the rule of law in concrete cases. So we don't just ask the people to reflect on their own sense of justice and if people obligated to follow, you know, to follow the law. We're like, well, how about in this instance? Well, how about, you know, like, do we have to follow the Trump travel ban, or do we have to follow Dred Scott, or do we, you know, so we ask specific cases. And we specifically picked 3 questions that mirrored each other. One was meant to be unjust to a Democrat, and one was meant to be unjust to a Republican. It didn't work out that well, but these were, you know, concrete support for the rule of law. Well, what do you think this index is going to do in an alpha? With negatives and, you know, very low correlations throughout, that alpha, despite 6 items, is gonna perform particularly poorly. And indeed, it's a 0.4, and none of those, you know, leaving anything out does any better. They all contribute to the suckiness of this index. You know, and I didn't, but I could double down and say, look, these are balanced between Democrats and Republicans, and they do indicate support for the rule of law. Like, should we repress Black protest? Should we repress pro-gun protest? Should we follow the court order with regard to immigration? Should we allow ourselves to detain terrorist suspects without without probable cause, kind of thing? Like, they're all valid content wise, and so you could double down and say, I don't care that they're not correlated. They all significantly increase the likelihood. I mean, only 2 people out of 1,000 said yes strongly to all of them. So, that's meaningful, variation. All right. So here's some R code to run Chromebax Alpha. All right, let's talk about factor analysis, since this is one you haven't done much. So factor analysis is in line with what's called data reduction. It is a kind of analysis that takes from a long list of items and tries to grab all the parts that correlate with each other. And then it takes it all out for one factor. And then it looks at the rest and it tries to grab all the covariation it can, grab it for a second factor, and then continuing on down the line, depending on the multidimensionality of the factors. There's 2 kinds. There's principal components, and there's principal factors. People don't use principal components anymore, but because I think it could teach us something about the way data is used, I thought it would be useful. And who uses principal components are AI people. People are generating AI models from just data upon data upon data upon data. They got to reduce the number of parameters they're using to predict whatever they're predicting. And so they extract variation atheoretically because they don't care about theory. Social scientists tend to use what's called principal factors that has a more theoretical basis. Okay. And then there's confirmatory factor analysis, which is its own thing, and it's based on structural equation modeling, and which is its own class. All right. So some of the steps are the same. They standardize all the predictions, and this does not mean normalize. This means standardize. The factor scores look exactly like z-scores. Factor scores have a mean of 0, and they have, they're in terms of their own standard deviation, just like a z-score. Okay, blah, blah, blah. All right, so principal component factor analysis tries to go in and grab information, and then it tries to see what's left over. And if there's a bunch left over that's correlated with some of it, it grabs it back, and tries to create as many factors while still reducing the variation that they're, too many dimensionality, like, if you were trying to do intelligence in a meaningful way, not the way the psychologists do it, you would get a bazillion variables on a person, throw it into a principal components factor, and then you might see, okay, stuff that tends to be spatial is kind of congregating over here, and stuff that tends to be mathematical tends to congregate over here, and then there's emotional intelligence, like all the kinds, and then it would want to know which indicators are indicating which thing. It might want to know that. Okay. The objective is just to explain as much variation as possible, give everything to the factor it can, and then reduce and use as little information as possible. Whereas common factor analysis might say, well, I have some ideas that I think that these data are going to be 4 different dimensions. Let's see if I'm right about that. So it might be like that. Okay, so let's look at some examples. So principal components says, okay, here's these 2 variables. They're correlated with one another. We're going to go in and look at that. We're going to see that this is correlated, and we're going to try to extract an orthogonal factor that is just like OLS, the mean of 0 is 0. If you do principal components factor analysis and you save your factor scores as variables and you run a correlation between them, they are 0 correlated with one another by definition. That's what this kind of analysis does. So principal components will say, okay, let's throw in all these things and we'll take some variation from X1 and give some of it to first factor and some of it to the second factor. And whereas factor analysis, common factor analysis, I don't know why they call it that, which is really confusing because of confirmatory factor analysis. I don't know why everybody has to be so fucking confusing, but factor analysis will try to say, okay, X and 1 are looking like factor 1, you know, X3 through 5 are kind of looking like the other factor. And then these factors are still correlated with one another, whereas these two, their correlation is 0. Okay. So item response theory, yay! So item response theory, you might actually use, you know, factor analysis is, I use it when I really want to understand the variation in the items I'm looking at, but I never use factor scores. And nobody uses factor scores, but you can imagine there's certain circumstances where you would use a factor score. But sometimes I'll create a factor score and then I'll create a categorical variable out of it. So you can do something in Stata called an X tile that says, okay, take this variable and mash it into 10 equal responses. And so then I get a 1 through 10 or something like that. Anyway, item response theory. Have y'all used this before? Has anybody heard of this? Do you know what I'm talking about? Yay. Okay. So it's usually used for a large number of dichotomous items. I use it for my exam questions. So I want to know, is this question good? Did the probability of getting it right correlate with everybody's exam score? If it doesn't, it's a bad question, right? And so IRT can tell you that. It can help you with your Gutman scales. It can help you defend your Gutman scales. So the probability of success on these dichotomous items is assumed, just like a Gutman scale, just like any other measure, is assumed to be a function of a linear latent quality like intelligence, ability to do well in college, preparedness on the constitutional law final in my class or whatever, okay? And there's two properties of these items. So in every other measurement thing we're talking about, we want to understand people that we're asking these questions of, right? And item response theory, you can use the analysis to understand people, but you can also use the analysis to understand the items themselves and to classify them. So the probability of success is like, kind of like a survival model. Now that I'm downstairs, it's more annoying. The probability of success is just like the probability of 1. It's a function of both the latent trait of the people you're categorizing, but it's also a function of the property of the item, just like a Gutman scale would be, okay? The main properties of the item are difficulty, which is really easy to understand given that some questions on an exam are more difficult than others, right? And if you're writing a good exam, you want some questions to be easy and you want some questions to be hard because you want to discriminate between the B and the A students, but you also want to discriminate between the F and the D students, right? So you create an ordinal, you know, quality of exams where you think things are going to be easier or more difficult, right? All right. Discrimination is a different property. Discrimination is whether this question whether the probability of getting this question right is correlated with the latent trait. So perfect discrimination, you'll have a perfect slope, and the probability of getting it right, you'll just have a perfect slope, okay? So that's what tells you discrimination. Difficulty is where the line starts to move in a positive slope. So there may be questions that discriminate well, but they discriminate on this side of the scale. Other questions might discriminate well, but they discriminate on the lower part of the scale. So we'll look at a couple of these. So like on the x-axis is the latent trait: intelligence, preparedness, quality of your dissertation, all the things we've been talking about. So think about like this theta, they call it, is your ability and some that you're being tested on. And then you've got the blue, question 1 is an easier question because it's the slope begins to go up. Like as you go from the worst student in the class to the, third worst student in the class, the probability of getting it right increases by 0.12. But for the question 3 is a more difficult question because none of those low people are getting it right. And soon as you're like getting to be -2 on the ability scale, then the slope goes up, right? And so this allows us to look and say, okay, all items are correlated with a latent trait. They have a slope, right? Whereas the first indicator is sort of like an intercept. You can think about it that way. And there's all kind of combinations. So if you look at, so this is an ICC that scales the things according to both difficulty and discrimination. I mean, you can ask the question, rank these in terms of difficulty and don't tell me anything about discrimination. That's a 1 parameter IRT model. You can have a second parameter, and the second parameter is always the parameter of discrimination. So this one tells us that item 1 is easier. Everybody got it right. Do you see that over here on the intercept? Everybody got that, we'll say it this way. Not everybody got it right. Some really shitty students got it right. That's what I would say, right? The intercept says some really bad students got it right nevertheless, right? But as you move up in quality, there's a linear relationship with the probability of people getting it right. And a lot of the best people got it wrong. Some number of the best people got it wrong, okay? Item Q3 here is kind of weird because nobody at the lower level got it wrong. But as soon as we're at, peaking above -2, then very quickly people get it right. You see that? So you can kind of see how IRT analysis allows us to estimate these different parameters, and the steepness of this slope tells us that at that point, these people are the people who came to class every day. They just, aren't necessarily, I don't know, smart or well prepared, or I don't know what. Like they've got some quality that stops them, but everybody at this certain level going from -1 to 0 basically causes almost 100% in the slope. And that is saying that it doesn't discriminate very well, not compared to Q1. And then Q2 is somewhere in the middle. So let's look at some real data. Oh, okay. This is something called a TCC, which tells us which items, and in this case, there's a Q1 through Q9, which items are the best measures of the entire exam. And so question 1 is pretty good. About 50% got it right. It discriminated at a certain level, and its usefulness goes down by the time you get to 2, whereas question 8 is a little bit of an easier question, but is also contributes to the validity. Whereas something over here like Q7, which is just kind of a flat slope, everybody's kind of, it's not providing very much information. Q1 and Q2, and maybe this green one and this red one might be all you really need to get a valid measure of the score, which I would hope for, because I give a 10 question multiple choice exam that is take home, and it takes the students 2 hours, and the average score on the exam is a 60. Despite all that. So I need my items to all contribute to the validity of the score if I'm only going to ask 10 questions. So that's why I do a lot of IRT on my examples. So here's political participation items. So getting back to question wording in the practice exams where I'm like, here's some data or here's some analysis. What do you think about this? I've got some questions. I have all the question wording. And what we did was, we administered the survey a year and a half after the hostage taking. And there had been a number of participatory actions, big protest here, big protest there. Victims are meeting with prosecutors, they're meeting with, Putin. They demanded an audience with Putin, and Putin went there and talked to them. There was a lot of that kind of action. And 50% of the victims were active this way. It's usually in Russia, 2% have ever been to a protest. And 50% of these victims who, aren't participatory, had no reason to be participatory, are suddenly resourced in political participation. Okay, so that's kind of cool. So we noted that there were 31 actions that were political actions that had been undertaken. So I selected out a few, and so we're just going to kind of look at them. Here we have in blue the did they go to the trial, of the one bad guy that lived. And so then the question is, so 50% did nothing. That's why we've got a bunch of flat curves for the initial part of it, right? So, and as soon as you pass 0, the slope goes up quite a bit, right? So you'll have did you sign the letter to Putin? Did you write the letter to Putin? Did you illegally refuse to leave the court? Is another question here. That's the red one. Did you go on a hunger strike? That's why I was thinking about hunger strikes. And did you demand a meeting with the prosecutor here? Yeah. Did you demand a meeting with one of the prosecutors along the way? So that was a more difficult item, so to speak, right? But notice, what are they missing according to this graph? What do these items, maybe except for the blue a little bit, what are they not very good on? They kind of discriminate. They're kind of some variation on difficulty, but by the time you get to this 2 under this theta, these people have done all those things, and so at between 0 and 2, we don't have very much discrimination. Y'all kind of see that? Now you can leave non-participants out, and then the slopes will look different, but I thought you'd be interested to look at that. And then here's what happens when you leave non-participants out. Pretty much if you're above -4, some of those people are going to this trial. If they did something, they were likely to do this. And this blue line did a great job discriminating. Y'all see that? Whereas the write a letter to Putin and sign a letter to Putin, once you got here to this latent construct of participatoriness, everybody did that. Everybody sat in and wrote the letter together. Everybody signed it, at that level, All right, so let's look at some other stuff. So then I threw in some more stuff, and you can see this is for the entire population. Again, the trial of is there, where they went to the trial, and they felt like the Russian government was corrupt. And so they, were trying to hold their feet to the fire. But you can see these items are not very discriminatory, Now we have the population of items, that, could possibly be in here. I mean, I selected out a set of items, but in the practice thing, I'm giving you the data and I'm saying, help me validate which measures are good. Decide for me what the least number of items are I could include in this index and still retain all information. So there's some here that are just, completely overlapping, like the gray and the green here, just they go up together. There's very little difference between them. They're redundant of one another, so they don't add any information. So that would be an example of something you might do with an IRT thing. And I've posted the R code as well as the Stata code to be able to do this analysis, for example. All right. Am I out? I might be out. Really? There's no more? Wait. Oh, yeah, there are some. That's what I thought. Okay. So GSS asks these questions. In uncertain times, I usually expect the best. I'm always optimistic. I expect more good things to happen to me than bad. If something can go wrong, it will. I hardly ever expect things to go my way. I don't count on good things happening to me. What are those a measure of? What's a latent trait? Optimism, right? Optimism. All right. So if you correlate them, you'll notice that because some of them are they're reversed, you've got to switch those items. So if you notice the items 2, 4, and 5 need to be switched. And so if you put these in an alpha, it's not going to be very pretty. But if you erase all the negative signs, now you've got a reasonable alpha. And I think it's like 65 or something. So I recode them. They're all 1 to 5. Here's the command for creating an index in Stata. And I tell you what, recoding variables, I haven't figured it out super well in R. Like I've got some code in there to help you do that, but R doesn't make it very easy to code and label and clean data. So here's a tab of a mean index like that, and this is why a tab is not helpful. Whereas here's the distribution from a histogram's perspective, and here's the correlation of the recoded items. Okay, now I'm done. So we've got a little bit of time, so I thought it would be kind of fun to look at some factor analyses together. Wouldn't that be fun? Y'all are like, I wish you'd just let me go. I mean, I'm not holding you here, but I've just been having such a good time with this factor analysis stuff here. All right, so you can tell I'm like, well, so many things are great. So where's my all right, let's have some fun here. Factor. So I'm throwing every single one of those 31 items into a factor analysis, and I'm doing a principal components factor analysis, okay? And so I want you to help me interpret this. All right, so first of all, here's what we have. So one of the important things to like things you need to know in factor analysis language is the eigenvalue. And it's too long to explain, but basically the eigenvalue gives you an indication of how much variation went into that first factor. How much variation went into the second factor, how much variation went into the third factor. So if I run a non-principal components factor analysis, what I just ran was like what the AI people do. And now we're going to run a political science one. So here we have 4 factors with an eigenvalue above 1. Whereas in this one, we have 6 factors with eigenvalues above 1. And eigenvalues above 1 are about, that's usually the cutoff, you know, but as you can see, it's 1.09, 1.0, 0.93. It really kind of goes down slowly here. Okay, so let's look at the principal components first, okay? So right now, it tells you all the correlations between all the factors that have eigenvalues above 1. That's basically what this does. So, I'll have to tell you what these variables are because you can't exactly tell, but there's like part RAL-BES. The RAL ones are, did you go to a rally? Did you meet with federal officials? Did you write to them? Did you call the hotline to say such and such is a problem? Did you go to the, did you meet with Shepel, one of the prosecutors? Ma'am is the kind of governor of North Ossetia. Hunger strike. Did you refuse to leave the court? Did you engage in a sit-in that blocked basically like blocking 36? They all sat down on the road, you know, illegally. Did you bring food to the people who are blocking the road? Are some of the questions, you know, did you talk to a reporter? Okay. So by definition, things are going to be more correlated with factor 1, but then it's going to take some remaining variation in factor 2. And we're seeing going to a different city. No, that's BES, part RAL. Yeah, it's just a different rally. And it's the first rally is 0 correlated with factor 2, but this rally is positively correlated, right? But if you added up these numbers, it's going to be less than adding up these numbers because, you know, more variation is extracted into factor 1 by definition. Okay. So we've got this other rally. We've got another rally. We've got, did you write officials? It's negatively related with meeting with Shepel, which was one of the prosecutor people. Negatively related with this prosecutor. Negatively related with signing a letter to Putin, writing Putin, picketing, negatively related to like sit-ins and refusing to leave the court and stuff like that. So what do you think this factor is as opposed to the first factor, which is participatoriness? Like, what do you think this is, given that it's like go to the easy rallies and do the non-risky things? Well, I just told you. Like that's my sense, is it's like it's you're not putting yourself at risk with endangering yourself with regard to the officials. I mean, just to take a step back, right after Beslan, Putin used as an excuse to just aggrandize his own power, right? He canceled federalism. He, you know, he started being particularly vicious in Chechnya, and the FSB, which is their FBI type thing. Anytime there'd be some like, well, we're going to build a community center here in Chechnya just to have a place to go, he would go in, bomb them, kidnap every man from the age of, 14 to the age of 25 and disappeared them. And a journalist reported those disappearances and Putin murdered her. Somebody criticized her murder in the UK and Putin poisoned him a week later with palladium, one of them, a bad one, polonium, one of the bad ones. And so one might think Putin is trigger happy on, and it's not like they don't know that they might be putting themselves at risk. Now, if we ask people, do you think that participating is going to put you at risk? People who say strongly agree are more likely to participate in the risky actions, strangely, and so I have to go down that road with you later on. But nevertheless, you might look at that and classify those items. Like, you use this as an empirical way to classify the items that are correlated with this one separately. Okay. Factor 3 is meeting with federal officials, meeting with Scheppel, going to the trial, meeting with the governor of North Ossetia, but is negatively correlated with some of the risky stuff. What is that factor, you suppose? It's all like going to the important meetings. And by the way, these are mostly women. These are almost a universe of women. Later on, it was less a universe of women, but these are all women. These are people who are more fearless and more resourced. Writing a letter to Putin or meeting with Putin or demanding things of federal officials takes balls, right? And so that is what, it's not only takes balls, it takes it's not like doing something illegal, that a reckless person would do. It's staring power in the face and saying, I'm not going to stand for this. And that there's a level of moral outrage and multiplied by confidence, that causes you to say, I'm going to have a conversation with Putin and I'm going to tell him what I want, right? Like, do you want to do that? Does anybody on this call want to meet with them and start criticizing him and telling him, he looks funny or whatever? It's like, I don't, all right. So now let's look at, come on. Now we're going to do something where we're going to rotate the factors. Where's my rotate? Oh, there we go. Rotate orthogonal. So you can rotate the factors to make them be uncorrelated with one another using principal components. You can't really do that with the regular other kind of factor analysis that we mostly do. You can't really do that. But in this case, we're going to rotate them. And we're going to make these 6 factors be different from one another. So we rotate. Yeah, we're going to rotate. Probably going to tell me, yeah, they're already defined. Okay, so we already have them. So, okay, so now I'm going to run correlations between these factors just to prove to you. So factor 1 is 1.0 correlated with itself. It's got a 0 correlation with the other ones, right? let's see, how do we do this? All right, so I'm gonna take all those. I'm gonna, I'm gonna correlate these factors with these different items. Oh, dumb. All right, so we're gonna correlate stuff with these various factors. And of course, they're all weirdly correlated with each other. So now you can see which variables are lending themselves to factor one and which variables are lending themselves to factor two, because we've rotated them and insisted that they're uncorrelated. Whereas up here, you know, the factor one grabbed all the variation and took it for itself, where now it has to share equally with the other ones, and it has to give up the stuff that's correlated with the other ones. And so that's kind of what it does. So now we can kind of see, well, what's lending themselves to the factors here. So going to Vladivostok for which is kind of like going to Denver for the Women's March or something. It's a little bit of a ways. Is correlated with that first factor. Meeting with the prosecutors, picketing, bringing supplies to the people who picketed, protesting the court, sitting in, bringing supplies to the people who are sitting in, refusing to leave the court, signing an international letter, and meeting with Putin. How are those activities different from going to a rally in Beslan, which is like going to a rally and, you know, you live in Erie and you go to a rally in Erie. It's kind of easy. So what is the nature of those participatory items that are different from, you know, meeting with other people, meeting with the governor, meeting with various other federal officials? How are, you know, sitting in hunger strikes? Like, who are those people? These are women. They have lost their children in one of the most horrific things I've ever seen. And you know who killed their babies was the Russian fucking government. And they didn't bring ambulances, and they said on TV, they're all sitting there, not allowed to eat, not allowed to drink anything. They're drinking urine out of their shoes, watching Putin go, it's no big deal. There's not that many people in there. They're not suffering. We don't have to do anything to help save those people, right? They like, if you were in that situation, who would your ire be directed at? You know? Right, like it's a moral indignation to have Putin say, I don't give a shit about you. And it's a mugger who says they don't give a shit about you when a terrorist doesn't give a shit about you, right? Like your feelings aren't hurt there. You're not betrayed. And literally the word betrayed is what killed me being on this project. She just didn't see it that way. I said, look, you know, they're not violent because they can depend on the Russian government to be violent. Their ire is directed because they were betrayed. And anyway, we disagreed. So she wrote her book, and now I'm talking to you about factor analysis or whatever. But like, these are people who are fucking pissed, and they are expressing their anger, right? In angry ass ways. And they've got moral indignation, and they're willing to incur costs and willing to be courageous in the face of that, right? That's what those actions are. So now let's look at some of these other factor two. So the factor twos are correlated with other stuff, like meeting with the prosecutor the first time. But this is really going to the trial. You know, where they found a guy who was partially responsible for being a hostage taker. You know, he was just like a carpenter who happened by the road and they picked him up and took him to the, you know, he didn't know what he was in on. And even some of the, you know, hostages were like, look, that dude is just a, you know, an excuse, you know. Some people wanted to hold his feet to the fire, but other people were like, wait a minute, I'm not so sure about that. So that might be the thoughtfulness in this exercise of meeting with the people to say, are you going to hold the government's feet to the fire who shot rockets into the school while we were inside, knowing it was going to kill a bunch of us, you know? And so that's like, okay, we're going to be thoughtful about how we're going to participate. They signed the letter to Putin, but they were less likely to meet with Putin. So maybe they were less likely to be leaders in the organization, something like that. Going to other rallies, writing the federal officials is what pops up here. So other rallies meant that these people were probably being leaders to other rallies. Participating in the hotline, like maybe they were less likely to be part of a group, but they participated in individual activities. So maybe their kid is sick or something like that. Then you got over here, this fourth factor is meeting with Scheppel, who was the first prosecutor, meeting with these other prosecutors, signing the letters, meeting with the governor, participating in the trial, but they were less likely to sit in and that stuff, right? These are also leaders, you know, who are participating in this. And then you have factor 5 that's picking up some other stuff. So anyway, that's what you do with this kind of analysis, is you start to disentangle what these items mean. Now, when psychologists are doing this kind of thing, they might put a bunch of items of variables that match a construct, but assume that there might be, that the construct is multidimensional, and some items are getting at one portion of the variation, whereas other items are getting to another portion of that variation. And so they can look at these to see if they're right about these items loading on different factors. All right, so that's fun with factor analysis. Now let's go back to, we're going to run a factor analysis. We're not going to do principal components. We're going to do regular factor analysis. That is the common factor analysis. Now, what this one does is, in principal components, it doesn't allow there to be any error. It assumes it's all meaningful variation. And common factor analysis, they know that when people answer questions, there's some random error. And even in participation items like this, that are not person sitting there going, well, agree, you know, they happen to not be around for that time. They, you know, they moved away for a bit and then they came back, you know, things like that. So in this kind of factor analysis, there's something called uniqueness. And uniqueness tells you, is this item, and that's not related to factor 17. But uniqueness just happens to be the last column among many. Uniqueness tells you that, okay, so we're going to generally get something to correlate with the main factors, and then we're going to leave the rest in error. And we're going to say, well, how much is this variable a function of something that's random, that's not associated with participatoriness? If you double down and say all of these items are an indication of participatoriness. And so it tells you, for instance, that meeting with the governor is highly that variation is, and ignore the 0.0137, is highly unique. Going to the trial and sitting there during the trial, that is a unique form of participation, given all the others. Calling reporters and talking to reporters, and, meeting with other people is a unique variation. Going to other protests is unique variation. It doesn't correlate with the rest of them. So, first eigenvalue is 12. Nothing goes above factor 4 for eigenvalues, and the 1.00 is just eking by. So it's basically 3 factors as opposed to principal components, which found 6, and so
Excuse me, I'm a bit
Please.
confused. What exactly are the factors here? They're be-
factors are, do you mean theoretically or do you mean empirically?
Empirically here, because they're not synonymous with the other variables we're seeing. So what exactly are these factors we're seeing here in the table?
Okay. So, theoretically, they're the latent construct of participatoriness, right? But the empirics of identifying, of trying to explain all of the variation, which allows for more factors, and then creating variables that are called factor scores that aren't created yet. I mean, when I ran that predict, then it creates variables. And so I have a variable called F1 and a variable called F2. And it is a function of the commonality of all of these items. In the first kind, I rotated it and then predicted them. And so that's why that's why there's a variable there that is, where is that? Yeah, that's why there's F1 is actually a variable. We could get a histogram on it. There's variation on it, and it is going to be correlated with these other variables. But the other form of factor analysis allows there to be error. And so if we predict, for instance, okay, let's predict these out of there. Oh, it won't allow more than 4 because it didn't. So now we've got F1, F2. So let's run a correlation between principal components F1 and the regular factor F1, and so on and so forth. F2, F3, and F4. Oh.
I think it's because you wrote it F3 underscore and did not put the F.
Oh, I see. Okay. So it's F3 underscore. All right. So like the principal components is the ones which is the F1. And so the principal components is correlated with the common one. The first factor is correlated at 0.7. So it's a variable that has the variation from all these items, but it's just computed in a different way. And that's why I'm trying to kind of help you understand what would be good about the one versus the other. And as you move down the scale, like they're going to be more correlated with one another, but yeah, F3 is correlated with F4, you know, so they're just variables. Like you could run a, you know, a histogram on the one from the principal factors. And that's because, you know, most people didn't participate in those items. But then you run one that is made from the principal components and you get, you know, a little bit more variation on those, and they're not all, you know, at the lowest end of the scale, you know, but these are variables that are correlated with the main construct of participatoriness. Authoritarianism is one that's really weird, right? Because you've got the right-wing authoritarianism, and then you've got just the wanting to obey, you know, just tell children they need to just shut up and obey. That's a different form of authoritarianism. They're correlated with one another. If you had a bunch of indicators that were indicative of one, you threw them into a factor analysis like that, they would distribute on different factors, you know? And so that's what they are. Does that make a little more sense? Because you use it to get information about your items so that you can better construct an index, you know? But you can also use factor analysis to extract scores that are supposed to indicate a latent factor, you know, that are constructed out of the correlation and the variation of all of these items. Is that a better explanation? It's like it goes in and it grabs out. It's like running you know, a lasso or whatever, you know, it's like tells the computer, go in and find a bunch of stuff and give it to me, you know, without thinking it through about which thing you know, how you want to measure each thing. You know, because like I went in and very thoughtfully took apart these measures and looked at them empirically, looked at their tabs, and then theoretically thought about what's the difference between a hunger strike and demanding an audience with Putin and that kind of thing, and constructed a, you know, quite detailed and thoughtful, I thought, thoughtful Gutman scale. And it was correlated with the count, you know, of just like, tell me how many things you did, which is what we ended up using because it was correlated with a count at 0.98. And then at that point, it doesn't matter to do a thoughtful Gutman scale. You know, you need to tell everybody your details and your thought process. A count just says, count up the number of items people said yes to and give them that for the participation score. Ranges 0 to 31. And, you know, that's what that variable is. So like if I ran a correlation with that variable, which is this one, with these other factors, it's going to be correlated with them. You know, it's correlated with that first factor analysis at 98. And it is that because it's created out of all of those items where these other factors have gone in and grabbed other variation, you know. But the main variable is correlated with both factor one from the common factor analysis and factor one from the rotated score that has had variation taken from it and given to other items. You know, then you've got factor two is correlated with the count at 37. This factor, because it only grabs some portion of the variation, is much less correlated. Factor three is a less correlation with the count. So do you see, like it's grabbing different variation. So if you took all of the authoritarianism items and you just created a mean index, it's going to be correlated with the individual, you know, make children obey versus the right-wing authoritarianism, right? They're going to be correlated with that. But if you allow a program to go in and grab all of the variation, take it for factor one and give the scraps to the other factors, which is what common factor analysis does, you're going to be more correlated with that overall mean index. You know, I don't know if that helps understand the sort of underlying, you know, thing here, but let's compare. Maybe this will help because you've seen a reliability analysis before. So let's try an alpha item and see what happens. And with 31 items, we're going to have a big alpha. The alpha is going to be 96. 94. I mean, yeah. So, okay, they're all positively correlated with each other. We've got an item test, okay, that says, okay, how much is it correlated with kind of a mean index of all of them, and then an item rest. And then we would look along the way, because there's not a difference between 30 and 31. You've got, you know, your alphas are not fallen, you know, are not going to be big if you delete those items. And so it kind of gives you a sense of how correlated they are with each other. But you're seeing like, you know, protesting at the court is more correlated with the common factor, whereas protesting in other ways or meeting with a reporter or some of these other things are less correlated. You know, a factor score is going to weight an index by these commonalities. So it's almost like, you know how you use survey weights to weight respondents? In a very similar kind of mechanism, it uses a weighting system to say, okay, I'm going to count this one twice. It would be like if I'm doing like a Supreme Court signal, and they've altered precedent. They're like, we are abandoning everything we've ever said on this topic for this case. It's like, I might want to like create a mean index, but put that one in there twice, you know, because that one really means something. Matt?
Sorry, I just have to head out. I have to go dog sit
Oh
Rachel's
yeah,
dog.
okay,
So,
we're
I'll see you.
running out of time. And you know, I'm happy to stay on, but you know, so okay, see you tomorrow.
Yeah.
Okay. So it, you know, a factor score will look at, so in this common factor analysis, we go down and we see the factor one has factor loadings, and it tells you if it was going to create a factor score, which we did create a factor score out of this, it's going to weight part Pickett more heavily than it weights part Raul-Bez, because it's got a lower factor loading. So that this would be the weights that it uses. Or if you look at the uniqueness, the ones who have a lot of uniqueness are going to be weighted less than the ones who have less uniqueness. Like the sit-in at the court just doesn't have any uniqueness. It is super correlated with the main factor. You know, it just doesn't have very much error. People remembered if they participated in a sit-in. It's probably got a good discrimination score, so it's super correlated with the latent construct of participatoriness. All of these factors are participatoriness. You know, there's just different ways of going about it. A mean index says, I'm not going to stress about which items to weight more. I'm just going to allow each item to weight equally. But a factor score says I'm going to allow the empirical story to tell me how I'm going to weight, create that index with the different weightings of the different variables. Whereas IRT says I'm going to use the different levels of of difficulty and the different levels of slope, and I'm going to rate it like that. So you can create scores out of an IRT. Like I could create an exam score that would be a function of the IRT. that would say, if you got the bad luck of getting that shitty question, it's not going to count against you, would be how like an IRT would create it. Or, if you got question 4 right, you didn't get question 8 right, and they both have similar discrimination, similar difficulty, they count for each other. They're replacements of one another in a sense. I don't know if that helps. But when you have high reliabilities, you're going to have a big eigenvalue, and so you'll end up with factor scores that are a big eigenvalue, and everything else is just 0 because there's just no other variation. All of them are meant to indicate that construct. So does that help? Okay. Yeah. That's why we don't use factor scores, because we don't really know what's in there. With a mean index, we know what that is. It's a little bit easier to communicate. Whereas you're looking at factor loadings and you're like, well, this is 0.6, the other one's 0.3. What does that mean, for what the variable is? It confuses people, and so they don't use them. The psychologists use them. I mean, this is straight up psychometrics. They use factor analysis a lot. So, okay, I'm going to send you the exercises in just a little bit. I mean, the file is already there, so you can download what I have, but I'm going to put some other stuff in there for you. So, all right. And let me know if you have any questions, Alberto. Thank you for asking all these questions, because it kind of keeps me on my toes here. Yeah.
No, thank you so much. I might not be here tomorrow in the afternoon because I have another meeting, but depending on how long it takes, I may pop by again. But thank you so much.
Good.
All right?
Okay. All right.
See you then.
Take care. Okay. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.